Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something I think a lot of us have felt shifting, the whole world of fandoms and countercultures. We got some really insightful comments from you, our listener, about how these communities seem to have changed. Like from way back before the internet to, well, now,
Yeah.
the super fast-paced time we're in.
Yeah, and those observations really hit home. That feeling you mentioned that maybe things are just too fast-paced to really delve into fandoms anymore, or that feeling that maybe some of the big ones, Harry Potter, Star Wars, feel a bit, I don't know, ruined by politics or cash grab corporations. And you also asked that really big question, do things like goth, emo, punk, hip-hop, do they still exist as countercultures, or have they just been kind of swallowed up by the mainstream? These are such important questions about, well, how we even experience culture now.
They really are. So yeah, let's unpack this, our mission today. Explore these shifts. We need to really define what fandoms and countercultures are, trace how they've changed through the years, and figure what it all means, culturally, psychologically, and maybe, just maybe, see if there's a way forward. For real community, maybe even for resistance. Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, we kind of need to start with the basics, right? Some foundational understanding. You asked us, what is a fandom and what is a counterculture? Like, are there definitions, pillars, maybe? It's the clearest way to tell these apart.
That's definitely the place to start. Perfect. Let's tackle fandom first. So at its heart, right, a fandom is basically a community, people sharing this really intense, passionate interest in something specific. Could be media, like a show or a book, an artist, a whole franchise, even just a subject sometimes. It's actually short for fan domain, which is kind of neat. But the big thing, the key, is that it goes way beyond just liking something. It's about actively taking part. You're participating in the culture around it.
Right, so it's not passive. You're not just watching the movie. You have to be, like, in it somehow. What does that active participation actually look like? Can you give us a sense of, how deep people get?
Oh, absolutely. Think of it like it's built on certain pillars. There are maybe 6 core ones. First, there's always that shared object of affection, the thing everyone loves. Harry Potter, BTS, Marvel, whatever it is. Then from that, you get a community identity. This is where you see the in-groups, the special lingo, the memes, the nicknames like Swifties or Trekkies, even hierarchies sometimes. And this is huge. There's emotional investment. Fans feel deeply. Joy, rage, betrayal. It's intense.
Betrayal, wow. Like if the story goes away, they hate.
Exactly. Or if a character does something unexpected, it hits hard. Which leads to the next pillar, creative contribution. This is vital. Fans making stuff. Fan fiction, fan art, cosplay, theories, video edits. It's a real participatory culture. Then you have cultural rituals. Things like conventions, live tweeting sessions, celebrating anniversaries. There are sort of sacred texts, the canon versus fanon debates. And finally, the insider language. All those terms like OTP, ship, headcanon, AU, stan, they signal you belong.
Okay, wow. That's a lot more structured than I might have thought.
It really is. So using Star Wars as an example, just liking the movies isn't quite fandom in this deep sense, but knowing all the intricate lore timelines, maybe writing fanfic about obscure characters, debating canon changes online, cosplaying as a Jedi, feeling genuinely upset by a retcon, that's fandom.
Got it. That makes the distinction really clear. So these pillars, they provide the framework, but do you think all fandoms have all of these equally strongly? Or do some lean more towards, say, the creative side, while others are more about the community identity?
That's a really good point. I'd say while the pillars are usually there in some form, the emphasis definitely shifts. Some fandoms, like early Harry Potter, were just incredibly prolific with fan fiction, just massive creative output. Others might be more about that fierce, almost personal loyalty to an artist, like you see with some music fandoms. So the balance changes, yeah, but those core elements, they tend to be present.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so if that's fandom, what about counterculture? We throw that term around a lot, too. What's the actual definition there? How's it different?
Right. Counterculture is, well, it's quite different in its core motivation. It's fundamentally a social movement or maybe a group that is actively opposing or trying to subvert the dominant cultural norms of its time. It's almost always political or ideological at its root, even if it expresses itself through art or music or fashion. You could maybe put it this way. Where fandom often seeks connection and celebration around something, counterculture seeks resistance and transformation against something, against the status quo.
Okay, so the key difference is that oppositional stance. It's not just being different for difference's sake, it's the why behind it. So does that mean like a fashion trend that looks kind of punk but doesn't have that anti-establishment ideology? It's not really counterculture, even if it feels edgy.
Precisely. It's the underlying intention, the ideology. And counterculture has its own pillars, too. There's that clear opposition to mainstream norms, challenging things like capitalism, consumerism, traditional values. This often shows up as an alternative aesthetic or lifestyle. The visual identity, think punks with mohawks, goths, and black lace, it's symbolic rebellion. But crucially, there's an underlying philosophy or ideology. Anti-authoritarianism for punks, maybe DIY ethics, radical freedom for beatniks or hippies. There's also a strong sense of community and belonging, often built around a shared struggle, found in music scenes, zine culture, underground clubs. Art as resistance is usually huge too. Music, visual art, poetry used as tools for protest, for getting a message out. And finally, countercultures often face marginalization or repression. They might be dismissed, sometimes even criminalized, or eventually co-opted and commodified by the mainstream.
So it's not just about, say, dyeing your hair blue, it's why you're doing it. Is it part of rejecting consumerism, protesting something specific, living differently?
Exactly. The blue hair itself isn't counterculture. The ideology behind it could be.
That's a really important distinction. They sound pretty separate then. Fandom celebrating, counterculture resisting. But can they ever overlap or influence each other?
Oh, they absolutely can. And think about Star Trek back in the 60s. It had some pretty progressive, almost countercultural ideas for its time about diversity in society before it became this massive mainstream thing. And even today, you can find countercultural energy within fandoms, maybe through queer readings of mainstream stories or political fan edits or using fan communities to organize around social causes. So while the core motivations, celebration versus resistance, are different, the lines can definitely blur sometimes. You get these interesting hybrid spaces.
Okay, that really helps lay the groundwork. We have fandom, we have counterculture, we see the differences and the potential overlap. But you also asked how this has all changed over time. Because, wow, it feels like it's changed a lot, hasn't it?
Oh, undeniably. It's a huge shift. We can probably break it down into, say, 4 main eras of transformation. First, let's go back to the pre-internet era. So roughly before 1995, let's call it the subcultural age. Back then, fandom was slow. It was local. It was analog. Its nature was defined by dedication, really, not by how visible you were.
Right, like really grassroots stuff. Small groups, super dedicated, zines and things.
Exactly that. Access was mainly through physical zines you'd trade or buy, conventions, just word of mouth, maybe trading VHS tapes. Think of the original Trekkies. They basically invented modern fandom with their conventions and fan fiction, right? Or the intense loyalty you saw with music groups like the Beatles or the Kiss Army. And comic book fans, D&D players, they were often kind of stigmatized, seen as nerdy outsiders, but they built these really tight DIY communities. And of course, you had major subcultures like punk and goth, highly aesthetic, deeply countercultural. Music was central, but it was the whole lifestyle, the anti-establishment vibe, the emotional tone then. It was often about finding refuge. These were truly outsider cultures, finding connection away from the mainstream.
And then, boom, the internet arrived.
Yeah.
That must have just completely changed the whole game.
Totally changed it. That brings us to era 2. The early internet, say 1995 to 2005. Let's call this the discovery age. This is when fandom really started moving online. You get forums, early fan websites popping up. We start seeing the first big online shipping wars, intense debates about character relationships, people doing deep dives into lore. Access shifted to platforms like Yahoo Groups, LiveJournal, message boards like Guy Online, fanfiction.net.
Oh, yeah, I remember some of those. LiveJournal was huge for this, wasn't it?
Huge. This was the era of the massive Harry Potter fanfiction explosion, the endless shipping debates. Anime fandoms got really big online too, arguing about subs versus dubs, making anime music videos AMVs, and shows like The X-Files, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, movies like Lord of the Rings. They found these enormous, passionate online communities. The feeling then was incredibly passionate, obsessive even, but also super creative, really generative. This was fandom feeling really organic, built for community and that shared obsession, not really designed for monetization yet.
Okay, and then social media hits, which feels like when everything just cranked up to 11, maybe even broke the dial.
That's a good way to put it. Era 3. The social media age, roughly 2006 to 2017, the mainstreaming era. Fandom here becomes viral. It's highly visible. And very quickly, it gets monetized. Platforms like Tumblr, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Instagram, they become the central hubs.
Tumblr? That was peak fandom intensity for a while, right? Superlock and all that.
Exactly. Superholic is the perfect example of peak Tumblr fandom culture. You also have the Marvel Cinematic Universe taking fandom to this massive blockbuster scale, and the explosion of K-pop with incredibly organized, powerful fan bases like the BTS RMI, wielding real economic power through merch and streaming. Fans of artists like One Direction or Taylor Swift became these vital promoters and archivists, really driving engagement. A really key shift here is how the line between producer and consumer blurs. Fans start acting almost like unpaid marketers, hype machines. But in return, they get more attention from creators, sometimes content tailored specifically to them. This era also saw a lot more tension bubbling up, didn't it? Things like gatekeeping versus inclusivity debates, corporations trying to look like they get fandom, sometimes awkwardly, and the early sort of formative stages of what we now call cancel culture.
Yeah. Okay, so that's where you start to really see those cracks appearing. That feeling you mentioned earlier about things feeling like cash grabs, that starts to creep in here. So what about today now? Where are we?
That brings us to Era 4. The modern age, maybe 2018 to the present, let's call it the fragmentation era. Fandom now feels heavily driven by algorithms, it's incredibly fast-paced, and unfortunately it seems really prone to burnout, both for fans and creators. Everything feels simultaneously niche, like there's a tiny fandom for everything, but also hyper-visible because of platforms like TikTok, Discord, streaming services, all that short-form content. They really dominate the landscape now.
And what are the big trends you see in this current era?
Well, one major trend is that fandoms often feel very short-lived. They ignite really fast, burn incredibly hot, and then, poof, people move on. There's definitely a lot more cynicism. That cash grab fatigue you mentioned is very real, especially around big, long-running franchises like Star Wars, Harry Potter, even Marvel sometimes. Politics seems to have woven itself into almost everything, which makes pure escapism feel complicated, maybe even impossible for some. And honestly, there's just so much content. Creation overload. It's hard to follow anything deeply without feeling like you're drowning.
Wow, that paints a pretty intense picture. So, given all that, are there any fandoms left that feel like they have that older, deeper engagement?
Yeah.
Or has everything succumbed to this cycle?
No, not everything. There are definitely still incredibly powerful, dedicated fandoms out there. K-pop is a huge example, with groups like BTS and Blackpink having massively engaged global fan bases. Taylor Swift, obviously. Minecraft, games like Genshin Impact, the whole critical role phenomenon. And games from software, like the Souls games, Elden Ring, or even recent Zelda games. Huge, dedicated followings, BUT. And this feels like a really important distinction for this era. Modern fandoms often seem more content-centric than community-centric. They seem to revolve more around rapid-fire reactions to new trailers, game updates, artist announcements, controversies, rather than that slower, deeper, more reflective engagement and community building we saw in earlier eras. It's more reactive.
Reactive versus reflective. That's a really interesting way to frame it. But that's a fascinating history of fandom's evolution. Now let's circle back to countercultures. You were wondering if things like goth, emo, punk, hip-hop, if they still exist in that original sense, or they've just been, as you put it, engulfed by the mainstream. What's the verdict?
Yeah, that's a crucial part of the picture, and the short answer is yes, there's been a lot of mainstream absorption and commodification. Many of the aesthetics, the looks associated with these countercultures have definitely been pulled into the general fashion cycle. You know, alt styles become TikTok trends, or they show up in fast fashion collections for a season, often completely disconnected from the original ideology or music scene.
So, like, the look is there, but maybe the substance, the resistance part gets lost.
Often, yeah, that seems to be the pattern. Take punk and emo. They absolutely still exist. People still identify with them, make the music. But in the mainstream consciousness, they're often nostalgia-coded. You see emo nights at bars, punk fashion revivals. It's often framed as a throwback. Hip-hop is interesting. It's still this massive global cultural force, undeniably, but it's also fragmented into countless micro-genres. You have mainstream chart-topping rap coexisting with incredibly vibrant local underground scenes that still feel very countercultural in spirit. But I think, generally speaking, what we might call counterculture today, its most potent forms might actually be in ideological movements rather than purely aesthetic or music-based ones. Things like climate activism, certain strands of anti-capitalism, neurodivergence advocacy. These movements often have a strong critique of the status quo, alternative values. The focus there is primarily on the belief system, the call to action, maybe more than a specific look or sound.
That makes sense. The resistance is still there, but maybe it expresses itself differently now. Okay, so let's try to tie this all together. You had this gut feeling that things just feel too fast now, too cynical. Can we really pinpoint the core shifts that created that feeling? What actually happened to fandom and counterculture?
I think we can. And it comes down to this fundamental trade-off. Fandoms used to offer primarily belonging and depth. Now they often offer primarily entertainment and speed. And that switch has real consequences. We've kind of identified maybe 7 key shifts that explain this. First, there's the shift from subculture to content category. This is huge. Fandoms and countercultures used to feel like these kind of hidden worlds, almost like secret identities or tribes you had to find. Now, they often feel more like hashtags, algorithmic categories that platforms use to sort us and serve us ads. Like being goth used to mean being the weird kid at school, finding your people at the local record store or club, living a certain way. Now, for many, it can mean posting the right makeup tutorial on TikTok to fit the goth aesthetic. The algorithms reward that surface-level stuff, and it flattens these really rich, complex identities into easily digestible brands.
Right, it becomes the vibe or the aesthetic divorced from the history or the music or the ideology, just the surface.
Yeah, exactly. The second big shift is acceleration and compression. Getting deep into a fandom, understanding a counterculture's history and philosophy, that takes time. It requires immersion. But today's culture demands speed, constant novelty. Fandom arcs, the hype, the discussion, the backlash, the forgetting can happen over a single weekend now. We don't really marinate in our love for something or our theories about it anymore. We tend to snack on hype. We scroll past hot takes. And that pace, it inevitably leads to burnout. It's exhausting.
Yeah, you can't sustain that level of intensity when the next big thing is always dropping tomorrow.
Precisely. Third, there's the monetization of identity. This one feels really central to that cynicism you mentioned. Traditionally, both fandom and counterculture often define themselves against the market. They were about passion or resistance, not profit. Now, they frequently are the market. Corporations don't just sell to fans, they actively co-opt fan behaviors, fan language, fan aesthetics to sell everything. Subcultures built on DIY ethics or anti-consumerism. Now you can buy the pre-distressed t-shirt at a department store. It's like that old joke, right? The revolution will be merchandise. It feels less like a joke now.
It really does. It feels like every cool niche thing eventually gets strip mined for profit, which must erode trust.
Definitely. And that connects to the fourth point, the loss of gatekeeping, for better and worse. Okay, so old school cultures, they often had high barriers to entry. You had to know the right people, read the right designs, learn the codes. This fostered really strong, tight-knit communities. But let's be honest, it could also be really exclusionary and elitist. The internet, especially early on, promised open access. Anyone could join, which is great in theory, right? More inclusive. But in practice, that wide open door also led to fragmentation, constant infighting, a kind of dilution of shared culture. It's like maybe we wanted community without the elitism, but what we sometimes ended up with was content without cohesion and maybe more surface-level participation.
The double-edged sword of openness.
Yeah.
Interesting. What's the next?
Fifth is surveillance, visibility, and safety. This is crucial for the feel of modern fandom. Fandoms and countercultures used to thrive in relatively private spaces, bedrooms, basements, conventions, closed forums. Now, everything feels public. Every tweet, every post, every fan creation is potentially visible to everyone, including creators, haters, corporations. This creates immense pressure to perform your passion correctly, to always be on brand as a fan. And there's this constant fear of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, of getting called out or canceled.
Yeah, that pressure must stifle things. Like, can you even be playful or experimental or just wrong sometimes when everything feels so high stakes and permanent?
Exactly. It really limits nuance, genuine curiosity, the freedom to just mess around and explore ideas without judgment. Sixth, a collapse of the fan-creator boundary. This has been a massive shift. Creators are online now. They see the discourse. They're expected to engage, to respond, sometimes even to cater to fan demands. Fans, in turn, feel empowered to give constant feedback, to influence the story, to critique every choice. This feedback loop, it can become exhausting and feel really transactional for both sides.
Yeah.
We kind of thought maybe closer access would make creators seem more human, more connected, but instead it sometimes feels like it's turned fans into unpaid marketers or perpetual critics, and creators feel like they're living under a microscope, constantly managing expectations.
That sounds incredibly stressful for everyone involved. Okay, and the last one.
And finally, seventh, this shift from resistance to rebranding. This applies more to counterculture, but has echoes in fandom too. True counterculture used to signify genuine resistance, a kind of defiant, screw your system, energy. Now that edge often gets softened, repackaged, and sold back to us as curated edge. It's not resistance, it's a vibe. Here's the punk aesthetic for your fall wardrobe. Potentially threatening ideas or lifestyles get turned into marketable flavors, easily consumed and discarded. But, and this is important, it's not all bleak. As I mentioned, new forms of resistance are bubbling up. Maybe they're quieter, more focused on specific issues like climate change or neurodiversity or anti-capitalist organizing. They exist, even if they don't look like punk rock in 1977.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to process. So if we had to boil it down, give that TLDR summary of the big changes, it's like fandom went from being this deep community of shared meaning to more of a fleeting trend based on public display. Counterculture shifted from genuine resistance from the margins to more of a marketed aesthetic. Engagement turned from slow, personal, maybe creative acts into something fast, public, often monetized and reactive. And identity itself transformed from being about finding meaning within a group to being about achieving visibility online.
That sums it up perfectly, I think. That's the core transformation. And this leads us right into your next really deep question. What has all this done to us, culturally, psychologically? And that question you posed, was one era actually better?
Yeah, it feels like these changes must have a real impact, not just on culture out there, but on us individually. How we feel, how we connect. What's the psychological fallout?
It really does hit deep. I think there are a few major impacts we can trace. First, this shift from belonging to broadcasting. We touched on this. Fandoms and countercultures used to be these spaces where you could find deep, almost tribal belonging. Shared secrets, private rituals, refuge. Now they're often used as platforms to broadcast an identity to an audience. It's about being seen, performing fan. So we might trade that feeling of deep, implicit belonging for a shallower sense of visibility. We feel seen, perhaps, but maybe not truly known or understood within a community.
Seen but not held, maybe.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. Second, related to that, is this heightened sense of identity as performance. Social media inherently encourages us to curate a persona. Even authentic passion, whether it's for a band or a political cause, often requires public performance to be validated now. Radical ideas can get flattened into an aesthetic choice. I perform activism by wearing this slogan. This can subtly erode our own internal coherence. Who we are starts to get tangled up with how we appear online, how our performance is received.
It sounds exhausting, constantly managing the brand of you.
It can be. Third, there's hyperstimulation and shallow attachment. When new content, new fandoms, new trends are constantly hitting us, we consume them like snacks, not slow-cooked meals. Every trailer drop, every new season, every controversy gives us a little dopamine hit, a rush of hype, but it's often followed by quick burnout or just moving on to the next shiny thing. We end up culturally overstimulated, but maybe emotionally undernourished, always chasing the next wave, never really putting down deep roots in any one cultural home.
That rings very true, the constant churn.
Yeah. Fourth impact, a growing distrust in cultural authenticity, because everything can be monetized because creators do sometimes pander because aesthetics are co-opted. Many people just default to cynicism. Is this artist genuine, or is it just a marketing strategy? Is this movement real, or just a trend? This pervasive skepticism makes it harder to trust communal spaces, harder to believe in shared meaning, harder to form genuine connections around culture.
It poisons the well a bit, doesn't it?
It really can. And fifth, maybe the deepest one, is a kind of loss of sacredness. Fandoms, for many people, used to feel genuinely sacred. Your OTP, your favorite book series read under the covers, the local music scene that saved you. It had weight, meaning. Countercultures often had an almost holy sense of purpose, of righteous rebellion. When everything becomes just content, disposable, scrollable, monetizable, it gets harder to find things that feel truly sacrosanct, truly meaningful, beyond their immediate utility or entertainment value. And that spiritual hunger, that need for the sacred, it doesn't just disappear. It often finds, well, less healthy outlets.
Okay. Sorry, quite a list of impacts. Heavy stuff. So thinking about all that, let's revisit that question. Was one era truly better than another? Can we even say that is more complicated?
It's definitely complicated. It's not a simple, yes, the past was better, or no, now is better. It really boils down to what you value most in your cultural life. Let's compare them side by side. If you look at the old school era pre-internet, early internet, yes, access was often gatekept, harder to get in. But the trade-off was often incredibly high emotional and ideological depth. Real immersion. Communities were smaller, often local or tightly knit online, very DIY, very analog or early digital creativity. There was usually a strong anti-mainstream posture, a sense of being separate. And the emotional payoff was huge, that powerful feeling of belonging, of shared purpose, sometimes of rebellion. Burnout was generally lower because things moved slower. Culture felt like it was about identity and meaning.
Okay, so depth, belonging, meaning maybe slower pace, but potentially exclusionary. What about the modern era then? What are its pros and cons?
The modern era offers incredible access. It's inclusive, global, fast. That's a massive positive. Anyone can potentially find their niche. But the depth is often shallower, more fleeting. Communities are global, yes, but often feel fragmented, less cohesive. Creativity is super fast, digital, often based on remixing existing content. And the lines with commerce are incredibly blurred. It's hard to escape monetization. The emotional payoff seems to be more around visibility, being seen, being part of the hype, experiencing novelty. But the cost is often a high burnout, constant pressure, maybe feeling overwhelmed or cynical. Culture here often feels more like entertainment than deep meaning.
So neither is perfect. It's a trade-off. Depth versus breadth. Belonging versus visibility. Slower meaning versus faster entertainment.
That's a really good way to frame it, yeah. We seem to have traded a certain kind of depth and belonging for unprecedented breadth and visibility. And speed, lots of speed.
Okay. This sets up the final and maybe most important part of our conversation. The questions you asked us about the future. You asked, should we try to revive fandoms and countercultures? What does the future look like? Is there a way to revive them? Are there spaces to create new ones? How do we even do this? Does it require people to buy in? These feel like really vital questions right now. Where do we go from here?
They are vital, and my gut feeling, my answer is yes. We absolutely should try, but crucially, not as some kind of nostalgia trip just trying to perfectly recreate the past. That won't work. It has to be about intentional design, taking the wisdom, the valuable parts of those older models, and adapting them for our current reality, for the digital age.
Okay, intentional design. I like that. So let's start with fandoms. How would we intentionally try to revive that deeper sense of fandom? What would that look like?
For fandoms, I think it means making conscious choices. Choices, too. Slow down. Deliberately create spaces and practices that allow for longer-term engagement, not just instant reactions. Go deep. Encourage discussions, analysis, theory crafting, things that require reflection, not just retweets. Rebuild community, maybe in smaller, more intimate settings. Private Discord servers, niche forums that aren't algorithm-driven, maybe even curated email newsletters or, dare I say, blogs.
Go retro, blog.
Hey, maybe. And create for love, not clicks. Encourage making fanfic, art, essays, whatever, simply for the joy of expression or for a small group, even if it doesn't go viral. Detach creativity from metrics. And finally, curate meaning. Lean into the things that make fandom rich, embracing fanon, complex shipping discussions, developing shared rituals, and inside jokes again.
Okay, that sounds quieter, more deliberate. What about countercultures? Reviving that spirit of resistance seems even harder when everything gets commodified so fast.
It is harder, perhaps, but I think the principles are similar, maybe just with a sharper political edge. For countercultures, it has to start with prioritizing values over aesthetics. It can't just be about looking rebellious. It has to be about believing and acting differently. It means actively choosing to build alternative spaces. Supporting or creating indie media, zines, independent music venues, maybe worker co-ops, things outside the dominant corporate structures. It's about practicing the things the system struggles to monetize. Things like silence, deep listening, genuine solidarity, patience, slowness, things that don't fit neatly into a content feed. And yeah, maybe allowing weirdness to be sacred again, defending authenticity, real idiosyncrasy in the face of this overwhelming pressure towards homogeneity and branding.
Values over aesthetics, building alternatives, practicing the unmonetizable. That feels genuinely counter. Okay. So if we try to do these things, what does the future potentially look like? Are we just fighting against the tide? Or could we actually build something different? Are there paths emerging?
Yep. I think we're at a crossroads, honestly. Two broad paths seem to be diverging. Path one is just the content spiral. Business as usual. If we just let things continue, fandoms and subcultures will likely keep getting flatter, faster, more trend-driven. More burnout, more algorithmic control, everything driven by engagement metrics. This path leads to, well, more of the same. Shallow community, constant stimulation, pervasive fatigue. But there's another possible path. Let's call it the intentional rebuild. This is where people consciously choose to opt out of that main churn. They start forming smaller, more resilient, human-first cultures. These cultures would be slower, deeper, more resistant to the algorithm's demands. They'd prioritize connection over clicks. This path is quieter, less visible perhaps, but potentially much more meaningful and sustainable. It actually mirrors how many of the original countercultures and fandoms started quietly, at the edges, out of sight.
The intentional rebuild. I like the sound of that. So can we really do it, revive these things? Does it take some huge movement, or can it start small?
Yes, I believe we can. But not by waiting for things to magically go back to how they were. We have to build it, intentionally. And absolutely can start small. It has to start small. How? By fostering slow spaces, consciously moving some of our cultural engagement away from the infinite scroll of fast feeds. Maybe it's a dedicated forum, a newsletter you actually read, a private blog circle, regular in-person meetups. Imagine like a book club that decides to reread an old fantasy series, one chapter a week, and share thoughts or art just within that small group. Yeah. That's a slow space.
Okay, slow spaces. What else?
We need to make without monetizing, or at least decenter monetization. Value the act of expression, of creation, for its own sake or for the connection it builds, not just for its potential reach or revenue. We need ritual, not just routine. Shared traditions, inside jokes, storytelling nights, things that make participation feel special, sacred even, not just another task or notification. We need gateways, not gatekeeping. Instead of making it hard to join, create welcoming paths in, maybe well-curated starter packs, fan guides, mentorship programs within communities to help newcomers find their footing and feel genuinely included. And crucially, put culture over commerce. Start with the vibes, the values, the shared vision, then maybe think about merch later, if at all. Ask first, what are we actually for? What, if anything, are we resisting? Build the meaning first.
Hey, that sounds incredibly hopeful, actually. Building intentionally, starting small. But is there really space to create completely new fandoms or countercultures now? Or are we just destined to recycle the old ones?
Oh, absolutely there's space. In fact, I'd argue this current moment might be uniquely fertile ground for new things to emerge. Precisely because of the problems we've discussed. Think about it. AI is starting to flood culture with generic, derivative noise. What do humans crave in response? Authenticity, curation, real meaning, things AI struggles with.
The human element becomes more valuable.
Exactly. And this widespread feeling of post-algorithm fatigue, people are tired of being manipulated by feeds. They're actively looking for smaller, more authentic digital campfires instead of the giant, overwhelming bonfire of mainstream social media. And young people especially seem hungry for identity that feels real, that offers genuine connection, not just a temporary trend to perform. So yeah, if you build something real, something with depth and soul, even if it's small, I truly believe people will find it. It will stand out.
Like planting a tree in a concrete plaza. People will notice.
Precisely. The contrast makes it valuable.
Okay, last big question you pose then. Does it require everyone to buy in? Do you need mass adoption for this kind of intentional rebuild to work?
No, absolutely not. That's the beauty of it, maybe. You don't need everyone. You just need the right ones. What you need are founders, maybe just one or two people, who care more about the meaning in the community than about scalar metrics. You need a core group of members who genuinely live the values, who model the desired behavior, who create the authentic stuff, the art, the discussions, designs, and you need a shared purpose, a shared passion that's clear enough and resonant enough that others can see themselves in it and say, yes, this feels real. I want to be part of this. Think about a small local zine club that slowly becomes a hub for creative misfits, or a specific D&D podcast community that generates its own amazing fan art and inside jokes purely out of love for the show. Or a Discord server just for fans of a niche music genre like shoegaze. These things don't need millions of members to be vibrant and meaningful. Counterculture and deep fandom don't require the masses. They require believers. They require participants. So as we kind of wrap this up, maybe a few final thoughts to leave you with. Consider this. Maybe what we're really starving for isn't more content, it's meaning. We're drowning in media, but perhaps we have less myth, less soul, less that feels truly nourishing. Fandoms, at their best, gave us these rich mythologies to inhabit, complex worlds to explore together. Countercultures gave us roles to play, rituals of resistance, a sense of purpose against the grain. Now, often we just scroll, react, consume, and forget. So this decline we're feeling, it's not just a shift in trends, it's potentially a psychological loss. A loss of coherence, of anchors for identity.
That feels very profound, the search for meaning in the noise.
Yeah. And another thought. Maybe everything just became too legible, too easily categorized. What was once organic, messy, maybe even a bit opaque, These rich cultures with their own internal logic got flattened, optimized for platforms, turned into data points. Fandoms with inside jokes only the dedicated understood became TikTok trends anyone could mimic. Subcultures that required real lived experience became just a vibe you could buy. Perhaps what made them special, what made them transformative, was precisely their illegibility from the outside. You had to immerse yourself, be changed by them, to truly get them. Now they're often so hypervisible, so easily explained and packaged, that they risk vanishing into the general noise.
That's a powerful idea. Losing the mystery, losing the depth required to enter.
But, and this is the hopeful note, the best of what was isn't truly gone. It's just maybe dormant or scattered. That deep devotion fans are capable of, that spirit of resistance that fuels counterculture, the sheer creativity of DIY, the intimacy of niche communities. Those human impulses haven't vanished. They've just been maybe overshadowed, commodified, or forced into smaller corners. But they can be reclaimed, nurtured. You don't need to perfectly revive some past scene. You can plant a new seed in its spirit. And remember, there is incredible power in small things done well, with intention. Original punk rock started in tiny clubs and garages. Early Harry Potter fandom bloomed on a few dedicated forums before it exploded. Every significant counterculture started small, with a handful of people saying, what if? You don't need to aim for scale right away, you just need to be real. Stay weird, maybe. And genuinely welcome others who feel that same spark. Build that campfire.
You know, listening to all this, it makes me think we're not really post-fandom, and we're not post-subculture. Maybe we're just post-illusion. The illusion that visibility equals meaning. The illusion that speed equals connection. And now comes the harder part, maybe, but also the better part, intentionally reclaiming culture, building it ourselves, the kind of culture that doesn't just ask for followers, but for fellow travelers, the kind that isn't afraid to be small or a little strange or even, dare I say, sacred. And maybe, just maybe, if you're the one listening to this, still asking these questions, still feeling that hunger for something deeper, then maybe you're one of the people who's meant to help build it. You don't need permission from anyone. You just need a corner of the world, maybe just a digital corner, a strange little spark of an idea, and maybe finding just one other person to say, yeah, I feel that too.